In the words of the late Nobel Prize-winning physicist, Dr. Richard Feynman, science is the belief in the ignorance of experts. How much of our base knowledge do we internalize simply because some alleged authority told us it was true? Those who've told us such tales likely don't know themselves when they are in error. To compound this situation, we have Mark Twain, who said, "It is easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled." So many of us hold on like grim death to what we truly believe are facts, regardless of how much evidence is offered to the contrary. In short, humans simply hate to admit when they are wrong. Our knowledge becomes entwined with our very identity, making it difficult to let go. Is it not a wonder that scientific method took so long to develop? Even now, it is struggling against a deluge of stubborn ignorance. This episode covers several topics which have gone against the grain in the past or continue to do so in the present. Threats of imminent disaster caused by global warming or climate change have been around since the 19th century. Either the earth is too hot, the glaciers are melting, will drown from higher sea levels, or starve in worldwide drought, or a new ice age will set in. We're inundated with non-scientific blather from the media, government, or scientists who just publish the party line or have their funding yanked. Worse, we have those entities colluding to erase or alter data painstakingly gathered over the last 150 years. Greta Thunberg's family has been running this game for 3 generations. Captured communications between the major players discuss how we should, quote, get rid of the medieval warming period, the Little Ice Age, and temperatures peaking in the 1930s around the world. The truth of the matter is that temperatures in the United States have generally declined since the 1890s. The longest periods of hot weather occurred before 1940, then cooled for the next 20 years before gradually rising, but not so much as Michael Mann would have us believe. CO2 levels were much lower in the first part of the 20th century, when days were hotter, and cooler at the end of the century when CO2 was higher. From the late 1800s to the 1950s, glaciers were receding worldwide, with dire predictions of their disappearance within 20 years. CO2 was also lower then. With increasing CO2, temperatures began decreasing. Similarly, in the medieval warm period, when Eric the Red began colonizing Greenland, CO2 was also quite low. The Vikings used longships and had no SUVs to get around in. The world then became colder as we entered the Little Ice Age. The Vikings had to abandon Greenland and the Maritimes of Canada. There was ice on the Thames, the Seine, and in Amsterdam as an inspiration for Hans Christian Andersen. In short, the levels of CO2 we are measuring have little to no effect on climate, and methane even less. By far the most abundant greenhouse gas we have is water vapor. It is amazing how long we choose to live in error when we have so much information at our fingertips. This is supposed to be the information age. Ideas become deeply ingrained when they are part of the matrix we live in. How many remember the food pyramid? For those old enough, how could we not? It was on every cereal box and consumer item in the grocery store. It was in public schools and public service announcements. It was pushed hard by the USDA and politicians. Strangely, doctors and nutritionists were silent. A decade and a half later, we faced an obesity crisis. Children were getting fat. Neither government nor academia were looking out for your kids then. The fat-free, cholesterol-free craze was a warm-up for the cereal-based diet instead of a balanced one. Instead of instructing people to moderate their intake where appropriate, we were given quite unhealthy and cheap alternatives. Every other item in the grocery store touted fat-free or light alternatives. The truth is, human beings need fat, cholesterol, and protein, along with cereals, greens, and fruits. Carbohydrates are much easier to take in, but an excess is quickly stored as fat. Proteins are more difficult to break down before used by the body. The very same people who caused the obesity epidemic then tried to foist solutions on us in school lunch mandates with abusive and intrusive body fat index shaming. Motives for spreading misinformation generally boil down to money or power, which are interchangeable in this context. A population sent herring off after solutions to non-existent problems are 1. Required to spend money or give up freedom in pursuit of these aims. 2. Propping up the general hubris of presiding institutions such as universities or think tanks. And 3. Distracted from more heinous crimes being committed right in front of us. Perhaps it is our preoccupation with the end of the world that makes us so vulnerable as a species. The sad part is there are so many who've always been ready to work this part of our psyche for their own ends. For most of our time on this planet, humans have been under constant threat from the elements, from wild animals, droughts, or plagues. Just as many have a natural aversion to spiders or snakes, maybe this persistent feeling of dread is part of our DNA. We did experience what is described as an age of reason, however. Where did it go? Are there only some reasonable people whom the rest are supposed to follow blindly? Why can we not all be reasonable, i.e., use reason to fight the manipulators? We've been told that without vaccines, we would all be under threat from polio, cholera, smallpox, or other nasty bugs and viruses. Worldwide, we experience far fewer serious outbreaks of these diseases than we once did. Was it the vaccines which accomplished this? I believe in some small part that it was. However, there is a much stronger correlation with the advent of modern sewage systems and the delivery of clean water to large populations. Waterborne diseases such as polio and cholera barely exist when fresh water is available. If those pushing the vaccines worked half as hard on the supply of clean water, we would see further reduction. Reason should tell us that the over 70 vaccines, with more every decade being given to children, that something is out of control. With the manufacturers grading their own paper, severely limited liability, and government mandates, Big Pharma is laughing all the way to the bank. When hospitals are paid to diagnose diseases patients do not have, we have what is called a moral hazard. No one rocks the boat when so much money is at stake, no matter how many may die. We're supposed to believe that government is looking out for us and that the technocrats have everything under control. All we need is to give up more say over our own lives. Industrial accidents are another area, we're told, was brought into line by our overseers. The fact is that deaths in industrial accidents had been declining long before agencies such as OSHA or Cal-OSHA existed. People died because of employer negligence in the 19th century as they do now, but technological improvement far outpaces regulation. No employer wants good workers or bad being maimed or killed on the job. They also don't want to lose them to competitors, placing more stress on safety. Machines and processes in general have been made more safe, both because it is more humane and better for business. There are modern theories generally accepted, but this was not always the case. Ideas of how mountain valleys were formed or how earthquakes occur were not always popular. Plate tectonics, or continental drift, as it was once called, was thought to be ridiculous as late as the 1950s, though the idea that continents were once closer to each other had been around for some time. No serious scientists put much stock into it. Looking at a map and noting how South America might fit together with Africa wasn't enough. Fortunately, there were a few who pursued the idea despite criticism from the establishment. Rocks and fossils common to South America and Africa, or the Sahara with other continents, were discovered. Seafloor spreading became apparent from the magnetization of cores taken from either side of the Atlantic Ridge. After a point, the evidence was too great to ignore. The idea that glaciers moved to carve great valleys, or moved massive stones over hundreds of miles, was also laughed at in the 19th century. This was a holdover from the creation myth in the Bible. Earth as it is today was thought to be as it always has been. Ancient animal bones were thought to be those only existing before the flood. Then came the discovery of marine fossils at high altitudes and geological observation of layers in the earth, analysis of rocks, moved by the glaciers, comparing them with those adjacent, determined that they did not originate there. Not only on Earth, but the entire universe was thought to be static. This was the case until the 1920s, when Edwin Hubble deduced that Andromeda and other objects were bodies outside of our galaxy. In fact, they were galaxies in their own right, clustered with other galaxies. Only the advancement of observational tools made this revelation possible. I don't believe resistance was quite as strong to that idea, but other entrenched concepts from that time certainly were. Hubble also deduced that the universe was expanding based upon the redshift of numerous objects. If a celestial object is traveling away from us, then the wavelengths from light emanating from it will be larger than normal or redshift. If it is traveling toward us, those wavelengths will be shorter or blue shifted based upon the spectrum. As most of the objects he looked at were redshifted, he deduced that the universe was expanding or that the objects were moving away from us. This is a basis for the Big Bang or some vast explosion which gave birth to the universe. In the late 1990s, astronomers added that objects much farther away were showing a higher redshift. The conclusion was that not only is the universe expanding, but the rate of expansion is accelerating. From several other theories and estimates over the years, astronomers tell us that the universe is approximately 13.6 billion years old. They also have several models and conjectures regarding the formation of galaxies. It is still early days, but the newest and most sensitive observatory, the James Webb Space Telescope, is causing me to ask questions. As with the famous Hubble Deep Field Image, JWST is looking at the faintest and perhaps most distant objects yet. Without breaking a sweat, those galaxies are much older than those in the Deep Field Image. They are thought to have existed some 100 million years or less from the beginning of the universe. The problem is that no astrophysicist would believe that mature galaxies could exist then. The models do not allow enough time for development to that extent. The next couple of years will either see a revolution in cosmological models, or even more kludged theories to explain the observations. What we're not told is that the theoreticians and cosmologists coming up with explanations may themselves be poorly trained. Plasma is the most common form of matter in the universe, yet models remain centered only on gravity. For most theorists, the properties and effects of plasma are never accounted for in their models. Plasma, for instance, will also cause light to redshift. Ergo, intervening plasma gives the illusion that a galaxy is moving away faster than it is, if it is at all. Galaxies, solar systems, and planets are likely under far greater influences from plasma and Birkeland currents than they are by gravity. This is not to say that gravity is not important. However, the force of gravity is 10 to the 36 times smaller than that between two oppositely charged particles. Over long ranges, charges and currents simply have to dominate. Unless science looks at some common sense arguments rather than inventing things like dark matter or dark energy, billions of dollars will continue to be wasted down the rabbit hole. The key point is that reliable observation always trumps theory. Theory must explain the observation in the end, or that theory is not valid. The two must work together as they ratchet up closer to the truth. Too often these days, we have so-called scientists trying to make observations fit their theory, but that thinking is backward from a scientific method. It doesn't matter how many letters one has behind their name. Politicians and much of the public can be fooled or manipulated for only so long until definitive data knocks their bogus hypotheses on its rear end.